A Crap Guide to Final Fantasy XIV Tanks by JoCat. Oh my tanking, we're here. This is probably the role that I am least familiar with still. However, having to tank in content, having to look at modern tanking and kind of how they operate. I'm actually working through Dark Knight right now as we speak, as well as Warrior's Wombo Combo City, which is actually kind of fun. I'm very happy, very interested to see that the tank video came out, but also what's gonna have inside of it. As someone that is still an aspiring tank in ARR, well, past ARR, but still leveling up to 50, I'm very curious what JoCat's stance on this is.
What up, warriors of fartness? I bet you don't have the slightest clue how to play this eyeball-melting anime game. Oh, sure, you probably know that you can beat up enemies by clicking on them until they die, but do you know how to find a static in your FC to help you prog uwu? I bet you don't even know what any of those words mean, so...
I just remember the video. Someone sent me one of my mods sent me the video. Hey, I see your prog. Nice prog.
Sit down, shut up, and eat your gissel greens, because I'm gonna teach you what thee mayhap not knoweth, thy noobliness. Welcome to A Crap Guide to Final Fantasy.
Amazing.
The tank is the person in the front lines of every group, leading the charge to...
What was the role? What were the roles? Me first. What Q times? Big HP bar. I am the mechanics. Coats and pauldrons. I think healer actually starts to overtake tank in a lot of situations now, actually, because generally when I go into tank, at least in leveling, it takes a minute or two, but healer is pretty consistently almost always an instant queue. But they kind of flip-flop. It just depends, right? It just depends if there's more healers on, or depends if there's more tanks on.
Every group, leading the charge to inevitable party wipes, which is because you are the most important person in the party, having slap fights with the boss since everybody else is way too squishy to handle the puss-pounding patty cake. You'll never see Jimmy's soft boots eyeing up the cloud of darkness with his 2x4 and scriggly tree branch. But how hard can tanking be? Turn on your tank stance, do your 1-2-3 combo, and blame the healers when you die, right? That
yeah, actually, hold up. Hold up. He's got a point. I will say, though, like, especially if you're going through, like, leveling specifically, right? Say if you're playing with newer players or even certain returning players, right? Like, the tank... So the tank kind of controls how fast the team's going. So if I'm going through Stone Vigil, right? And the tank is going to be, oh, we're going to pull the first group only. And then we're going to be... going to, first or second group maybe, versus we're going to pull all of the enemies up through that first room, the first square room. You go up the hallway to the right, up the hallway, up again, past the dragon, and then you go left into that room. That's generally the normal big pull, quote unquote, and that's still for like it depends. And even you can even go longer. I've had a singular pull where we've gone all the way to the first boss. The tank survived, one of the DPSs died, but the tank lived. I made sure he did. Like, the tank will control the momentum and the speed at which the party goes. And if your party is having trouble healing or they're having trouble keeping up, I would argue it's up to the tank's job at that point to assess. And that's just through world chat. Like, hey, you guys doing okay? Sorry, still kind of new to healing, or sorry, still kind of, I'm having trouble with these larger pulls. And generally, they're pretty receptive. They're like, oh yeah, cool. I can just do smaller pulls. And then, once you get, caught up, it's like, hey, let's do this. I've been tanking. One of my mods was tanking for me when I was healing. And it's like, oh, they're like, we can pull more than 3 adds at a time. We can do a bigger pull, right? And they're like, you sure? I'm like, yeah, I was practicing Stone Vigil all day. Like, I'm good if we want to just pull. So then he proceeds to pull the entire next area. And it's like, yeah, no, we're fine. The tank is going to be what's taking the most damage for all intents and purposes, and the tank is going to have to pull aggro off of a lot, which is also where the healer needs to be cognizant about healing, because if I say overheal anybody really, I can draw aggro onto me, because I think it's still counted as DPS in coding, right? So, but then that just the argument the tank can pull that back. There's a very interesting dynamic between healer and tank is what ends up happening.
That sounds like somebody who needs their short Q privileges revoked. Firstly, tank stance. You turn this on to start gaining enmity. What's enmity? It's where you shout at the bad guys, hey, hit me! They'll be paying attention to you so long as you're dealing damage, so you better be dealing damage and not just having a staring contest. If you don't, then they're gonna start indiscriminately charging at the rest of the party like a dog in a movie theater. If you are the designated main tank, or in light parties, the only tank, make sure this is on. If there is...
I actually didn't know that off-tanking was a thing. This is actually a good point. We're in raids and where you have more than 8 players, you will have your off tank, which is super interesting because I've never had to deal with that personally. But since I'm getting into more alliance raids and stuff now, I mean, I'm having to actually deal with that. I mean, things like Ultima Weapon used to be like 8-man, so I mean, people did have to deal with this. I just haven't got to that point yet. You know, not really much to do in AR other than Crystal Tower. That's 8-man content.
There's another tank in the party and you are the off tank, make sure this is off unless there's some other bad guys you gotta pull. If you have conflicting stances with the other tank, they will chuck their shoulder pads at you. As a tank, you should make sure the bad guy's ass is facing the party as often as possible, as indicated by the bright glowing half-eaten donut underneath the target. This is so that if the bad guy sneezes, you're the only one getting down with the sickness. And also, if your party has anyone playing any jobs that particularly likes to clap them cheeks, you've provided a bright shiny spanking space. On top of this, as a tank,
and that's what I call positionals.
You are, by Heidelin's blessings, horrible at dancing, which is why you should move as little as possible once you've got the enemy's attention. That way the party can continue to whap the wumpus without having to chase down the bad guy's glorious booty. Just as well, because you have control of where the baddies are, you control how useful everybody else is. So if somebody puts down a useful AoE, stop fucking running away from it. Now that you have the baddie's attention and are in a nice cozy poking position, you don't have to—
Ooh! I'm like, he's gonna fall. Ooh! Is this Amdapor? Yeah, it is Amdapor. I know that wall. I didn't know the mechanics that he will sneeze at you and then you fall off because he just sneezes you away. Oh, man. JoCat was... he was playing that pretty dangerously.
worry about anything else, right? Ah, that's what I thought you'd say, you dumb fucking horse. Believe it or not, when you die, it's not entirely the
horse? Me? No, I'm just a black mage, but I can see how the mistake was made.
The healer's fault, just mostly their fault. That little bit of responsibility you have is based on how well you can juggle mitigation. What's mitigation? It's the buttons that make the bad guy's slaps hurt less that you sometimes press once a subscription and never think about again. You ever wonder why you have several of those buttons that all seem like they do the same thing? Well, that's because you're supposed to space them out over the course of a fight so the healers don't have to sacrifice their entire mana pool and firstborn child to get your frail ass through the dungeon. Remember not to bust your—
I see this entire dance of the health bar. I see this so much.
Healers don't have to sacrifice their entire mana pool and firstborn child to get your frail ass through the dungeon. Remember,
a good tank, a tank that's good at what they do and manages their mitigations is invaluable. I mean, yeah, you can pop most of your mitigations at once, and sure, I mean, you mitigate a lot of damage, but I mean, unless you're mitigating for certain big hits, I mean, yeah, you kind of want to space them out. Just... I've definitely seen tanks that just aren't mitigating or aren't popping mitigations, and it's like, please pop your mitigations as best as you can. Even if you don't think you're going to need it, it will, in fact, at some point just come back up. I mean, obviously, once again, I'm speaking for more of a healer DPS role that's starting to get into tanking. So, I mean, like, yeah, no, everything like this seems to track, and I've noticed other tanks do this. And you can definitely understand, like, the flow of the dungeon will definitely change if your healer's good or if your healer's maybe not as good. You know, it's interesting to see someone who's really good at tanking actually work.
Or not to bust your tanking load all at once, or else you're going to feel a lot of shame when you're all out of juice and the boss still wants to go about 4 more rounds. Every tank also has a press X to not die button that can be used to survive any devastating attacks, or if you're a really aggressive paladin who drew every enemy in a dungeon ever and don't want the healer to hire a hitman on you. As for what your limit break does, tank...
Oh, God, I feel that one. Oh, so many big pulls. So many big pulls. And I'm just sitting there like, I'm going to heal you as best as I can. You got yourself into the situation. You better mitigate yourself out of the situation.
Tanks are thicker than the average Disney mom, to the point your honky chonky donkey bahonky extends to the rest of the party, protecting them from damage up to a whopping 80% at LB3. The thing is, unless you're a high-end player, you'll probably be using tank LB as frequently as a good player rolls high on loot. Overall, you have 4 flavors to choose from: punk, grunge, metal, and Christian rock. There's warrior for big axes, big anger, big self-healing, and if you like to do fell cleaves again and again and again and again. If you prefer more brooding than cruding, the Dark Knight is great for doing your best guts impression. You get a huge-ass sword, goopy black energy particle effects, and the literal best mitigation in the entire game, but it's balanced because they get the worst invulnerability button in the entire game. You press it, and then it makes you die. Gunbreaker is called a tank, but everybody knows it's just 3 DPS in a trench coat, as designated by the fact you get a fucking gun and your swings explode. But you have to be a hardcore gamer, since it requires a lot of cartridges. And finally, the Paladin, who tries to pretend they're a healer and caster, but only when the other healers and casters are looking. But fuck all that, because the most important thing is that you get the motherfucking sword and shield, baby!
Sword and
Try getting behind this wall of holiness, bitch! Now you know how to play tank, you're welcome.
No, that tracks. Gunbreaker is going to be an interesting one to get into. At some point, I will have to get into Gunbreaker, but I'm enjoying a lot of Warrior. I am enjoying DK. I'm curious if they still have it was probably a quest specific thing. The first class quest that you do for DK, it's like you have to go to the black orbs, and then it does kind of like the Neobralis Chrysalis boss fight, right? But I don't think that's actually a mechanic Dark Knights get, because while it gave them power up and mitigations, it cost like a third of their health bar or something like that. But yeah, no, when Gunbreaker actually sounded like an actual gun. They changed that, I heard, which is interesting to consider. Like, yeah, I understand the reason why they would change that, but I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, comment section, are you a tank? Do you prefer tanking? Do you agree when I say that a tank will control the flow of which a party does a dungeon, right? Where if you're in Stone Vigil, if the tank wants to do one group at a time versus they're going to go from spawn to the first boss fight and pull in the entire 2 corridors and room. I mean, you know, what are your thoughts on that? Have you ever had a healer just absolutely just like, I need you to not do that again? Let me know in the comment section, all that fun stuff, and I will see you in the next